My husband gave me a ring for our anniversary. At first, I thought it was just a beautiful gesture. Elegant, romantic, and thoughtful. But every time I wore it, something felt wrong. I became dizzy, unfocused, and deeply uneasy, as if a part of me knew something I couldn't yet explain. One day, I brought the ring to a jeweler just to be sure. He examined it closely, then looked at me and said, "Where did you get this? You need to go to the police, immediately. Before we continue, please write in the comments which country you're watching this video from. Enjoy the story." On their 7th wedding anniversary, Marco gave Elena a velvet ring box tied with a thin gold ribbon. Inside was a vintage sapphire ring, white gold, narrow band, elegant and cold to the touch. The stone shimmered softly, like deep water under moonlight. "It reminded me of you," Marco said, watching her reaction. "Timeless. Rare. One of a kind." He took the ring and carefully slid it onto her finger. Elena smiled and kissed his cheek. He had always known how to make her feel seen, even in silence. But later that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart raced without reason. The ring still clung to her finger, cool and quiet. She told herself it was just her imagination. But something inside her whispered it wasn't. The next morning, Elena woke up with a dull pressure behind her eyes and a heaviness in her limbs that hadn't been there the night before. She blamed it on poor sleep and shook it off, pushing herself through her morning routine. But by the time she arrived at the university, her head was pounding, her vision felt slightly blurred, and there was a strange tension crawling just beneath her skin. During her lecture, she stumbled over words she'd spoken hundreds of times before. Her heart raced, her hands trembled. For a brief moment, she thought she might pass out. She excused herself early that day and returned home. As soon as she removed the ring and set it on the dresser, the pressure began to ease. Her thoughts cleared. Her breathing slowed. The relief was so immediate, so noticeable, it unsettled her more than the symptoms themselves. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring, unsure of what to believe. It had to be a coincidence, maybe psychosomatic, but the next day, it happened again. Each time she wore the ring, the symptoms returned, faster and stronger: nausea, chest tightness, dizziness, the feeling of being watched even when she was alone. But once the ring was off, her body relaxed. Her mind settled, as if some invisible hand had been released from her chest. Elena didn't tell Marco. She wasn't ready to hear him laugh it off, or worse, act concerned in that perfect, practiced way he'd mastered over the years. No, she needed to be sure of what she felt before she said anything. But deep down, a quiet voice inside her was beginning to speak louder. Something about the ring was wrong. Not cursed, not haunted, just wrong in a way that made her skin crawl. Over the next few days, Elena tried to push the feeling aside. She told herself not to be dramatic, not to let her imagination get the best of her. But Marco's behavior was changing, subtly at first, then in ways she couldn't ignore. He started working late more often. He stopped sharing details about his day, brushing off her questions with a tight smile and a kiss on the forehead. When she asked if something was bothering him, he said it was just stress, deadlines, a difficult client. But his voice lacked warmth. His eyes didn't linger on hers the way they used to. One night, Elena woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of whispered conversation. She got out of bed slowly and followed the voice to the balcony. Through the crack of the half-closed sliding door, she saw Marco standing outside in the cold, phone pressed to his ear, back tense. He didn't sound angry, just hushed, controlled. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his posture made her stomach twist. She stepped back before he noticed, and returned to bed, pretending to sleep when he came in 10 minutes later, his hands cold as ice. The next morning he was cheerful. Too cheerful. He made her coffee just the way she liked it and offered to drive her to work. She declined, politely, and watched him leave, his jacket barely zipped, his phone still glowing in his hand. Elena stood by the window long after he drove off, trying to name the new feeling curling in her chest. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was distance, the sense that she was living with someone who had begun to turn into a stranger. That night, while he showered, she checked his drawer. Not to spy, she told herself, but just to feel in control again. Everything was in place. Neat, clean, folded. Too clean. She noticed the velvet ring box was missing, the one he had kept as a keepsake after giving her the ring. It had been there for weeks. Her fingers hovered over the empty space for a moment before she closed the drawer and stepped back. She didn't check his phone. Not yet. She still wanted to believe there was another explanation. But the ring kept hurting her. The redness on her finger worsened. A faint rash appeared around the band every time she wore it. The dizziness returned faster now, within an hour of slipping it on. The sapphire seemed to have darkened. Maybe it was her eyes, or maybe it was something else. She took a photo of the rash one morning and sent it to Jasmine, her friend and lawyer, with a casual message. "Think this could be an allergy? This ring is making me feel awful." Jasmine responded almost immediately. "You need to take that thing to a professional, seriously, and don't wear it again until you know what's going on." Elena didn't respond right away. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, holding the ring in her palm. It felt heavier than it should have. She thought of Marco's voice on the balcony, his sudden warmth after distant days, the missing box, and for the first time, the question took shape in her mind. Not as paranoia, but as a possibility. What if it wasn't just the ring? What if it was him? Jasmine Ford had always been Elena's anchor. Sharp, grounded, and brutally honest in a way that made Elena feel safe. They had met in college, both studying in different faculties, but bonding over late-night coffee, terrible dating stories, and the shared burden of always pretending to be fine. So when Elena finally agreed to meet her after sending that message about the ring, she didn't hold back. They sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe downtown, the kind with faded wallpaper and coffee that tasted burnt no matter what you ordered. Elena placed the ring on the table between them and stared at it like it might move on its own. Jasmine didn't touch it. She just looked at her friend's face. Pale, tired, and heavier than she remembered. "It's not just in your head," Jasmine said after hearing everything. "Your instincts have always been better than you give yourself credit for." Elena hesitated before speaking, her voice low. "I keep trying to believe it's nothing, that maybe I'm just exhausted or imagining things. But the symptoms, they're real. The moment I take it off, I feel better. And Marco, he's different. Distant. Cold." Jasmine nodded slowly. "You think he gave you that ring knowing what it would do?" Elena didn't answer right away. That was the part she hadn't allowed herself to say out loud. Saying it would make it real. "I don't know what I think," she whispered, "but I need to find out." Jasmine leaned forward, her lawyer side fully awakened. "First, you stop wearing it. Second, you don't confront him. Not until you have something solid. And third..." She paused, glancing at the ring again. "You get this examined by someone who knows what they're doing. Not just a jeweler, a specialist. Someone who won't ask questions and won't panic." Elena agreed. There was something calming about having a plan, even a small one. For days, she had felt like she was floating, adrift in doubt and confusion. but Jasmine's words gave her ground to stand on. They paid for the coffee, wrapped the ring in a cloth napkin, and parted ways with a hug that held a weight neither of them voiced. That evening, Elena returned home before Marco. She placed the wrapped ring in a small wooden box and hid it in the back of her studio drawer beneath layers of unfinished sketches. Just in case. Marco arrived later than usual and greeted her with a kiss that didn't quite reach his eyes. They ate dinner in silence. He asked about her day. She lied and said it was uneventful. When he excused himself to take a call on the balcony again, Elena didn't follow. She didn't need to hear more. She knew something was wrong. But now, for the first time, she also knew she wasn't alone in it. The next morning, Jasmine sent Elena a name and an address. Someone she said was discreet, meticulous, and above all, trustworthy. His name was Omar Reyes, a retired precision jeweler who now worked privately out of his home workshop. Elena called the number Jasmine gave her. Omar answered on the third ring. He didn't ask many questions, only told her to come by at 2 p.m. and to bring the item in question. His voice was calm, steady. Elena arrived early and waited outside in her car for 10 minutes before gathering the courage to knock. Omar's house was small and quiet, tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac, shaded by tall cypress trees. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood, polish, and something metallic. The man who greeted her was in his 60s, with graying temples and hands that looked like they still remembered the weight of delicate things. He led her to a small, tidy room filled with tools, lamps, and magnifying lenses. She unwrapped the ring carefully, placing it on a velvet mat in front of him. He didn't speak right away. He picked up the ring with a pair of tweezers, turned it under the light, brought it close to a loupe, then to a microscope. Elena sat still, hands in her lap, trying to read his face. His brow furrowed slightly, then deeper. He turned to a drawer, retrieved a finer probe, and gently ran it along the underside of the band. Minutes passed. Then he looked up. "There's something inside," he said quietly. "Something that's not part of the original design." Elena felt her stomach clench. "What do you mean?" He adjusted the light and pointed to a nearly invisible seam beneath the main setting. "It's been modified. Whoever did it was highly skilled, surgical even. But I can see the work if I look for it." He reached for a precision tool and carefully, with gloved fingers, pried open a tiny hatch along the inner band. A faint click, then silence. Inside the ring, nestled within the hollow band, was a hair-thin glass capillary, barely visible, containing a clear, colorless liquid. Omar stared at it for a long time. He didn't touch it. "I don't know what this is," he said, "but I can tell you what it's not. It's not ornamental, it's not decorative, and it's definitely not safe." Elena's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Could it be dangerous?" "I'm not a chemist," he said, still watching her face. "But if I had to guess, this was meant to release something slowly, absorbed through the skin, maybe, or the bloodstream. Whatever it is, it was put here on purpose, hidden, and very, very precise." She leaned back in her chair, suddenly cold. The room felt smaller. She tried to form a thought, any thought, but her mind was a storm of images, her symptoms, Marco's late-night calls, the missing ring box, and now this. Omar closed the compartment and handed the ring back in a small, sealed pouch. "I suggest you don't wear this again, and you find someone who can analyze that substance." Quietly. Elena nodded. Her voice caught in her throat, but she managed a whisper. "Thank you." He gave her a sad, almost knowing look. Sometimes the most beautiful things carry the darkest weight. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The pouch with the ring sat in the drawer of her studio desk, tucked under layers of old sketchbooks and worn-out pencils, yet it felt like it was pulsing through the walls. Her body was exhausted, but her mind raced in endless loops. Omar's voice echoed in her head. This was meant to release something, hidden, on purpose. She lay awake beside Marco, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. He looked peaceful, familiar. But now that familiarity felt dangerous. A mask she hadn't questioned in years. Around 3 a.m., she got up quietly and padded into the living room. She sat in the dark, clutching a blanket, debating with herself. She had his laptop password. She wasn't proud of that fact, but she knew Marco, his habits, his patterns, and he wasn't careful with the things he didn't think she'd question. His phone was always locked tight, but the laptop? That was his work machine. He never expected her to touch it. She opened it slowly, hands cold against the keys. The screen lit up. The password was their wedding date. He hadn't even changed it. Most of the folders were work-related: client logos, design mock-ups, contracts. She clicked through them aimlessly at first, almost hoping to find nothing. But in one folder, labeled Archive, she found an encrypted zip file. Its name was nondescript, Projet Final VI4. But the date caught her attention. It was created 2 days before their anniversary. She opened it. Inside were several audio files, some PDFs, and a folder named Insurance Docs. Her pulse quickened. She opened the PDFs first. They were scanned copies of a life insurance policy, naming her as the insured and Marco as the sole beneficiary. The coverage amount was unusually high, 7 figures. The date of the policy? Just 6 weeks ago. She opened the audio files next. They were recorded phone calls. Some were distorted, others clearer. In one, she recognized Marco's voice, low and calm, speaking to someone whose voice had been digitally altered. It has to look natural, Marco said. No marks, no traces, just a slow decline. Stress, maybe. Fatigue. The doctors won't know. Elena froze. Her body didn't move, but inside, something broke open. A quiet scream between the ribs. She closed the laptop slowly, her fingers trembling. Marco was planning her death. Not violently, not quickly, but meticulously, as if she were a puzzle to be solved, a process to be managed. She was being erased gently, symptom by symptom. She returned to the bedroom, her face blank, her thoughts a firestorm. He was still asleep, turned away from her. She lay down beside him, staring at the ceiling. She didn't cry. Not yet. There would be time for that later. For now, she needed one thing only: proof. More of it. Enough to make it undeniable. Enough to stop him. Jasmine made the call. She knew how to navigate difficult conversations, how to ask questions that didn't sound like accusations. The woman on the other end had a soft, hesitant voice, and after a long pause, she agreed to meet. Her name was Madeleine Rosier, and she had been married to Leonard Rosier, a master jeweler who died under what had been described as natural circumstances less than a year ago. Elena drove alone to Madeleine's house, a small cottage just outside the city, surrounded by unkempt hedges and a rusted mailbox. The door creaked open before Elena could knock. Madeleine looked older than she sounded, fragile, with a cardigan buttoned all the way to her neck, and tired eyes that had seen too much. She didn't smile, just stepped aside and motioned for Elena to come in. They sat in a living room filled with dusty photographs and the quiet hum of a wall clock. Elena didn't know how to begin. She placed the sealed pouch with the ring gently on the table between them. Madeleine stared at it, her expression unreadable. My husband made something like this, she said at last. Her voice was calm, but her fingers clenched tightly in her lap. He wouldn't tell me who it was for. Said it was just a custom job. But it haunted him. He stopped sleeping. Said he felt like he'd helped someone do something terrible. Elena listened silently, her throat tight. Do you remember when the order came in? Madeline nodded. It was months before he died. He argued with the man, said he didn't do modifications, that it was unethical. But the man kept pushing, insisted it had to be discreet, precise. Leonard gave in eventually. We were behind on bills. He told me he'd do it once, then never again. Her eyes flicked to the ring. He said it involved something hidden, something not right. Elena's heart pounded. Did your husband say the client's name? No. Madeline's voice dropped. But he said the man was polite, clean, well-dressed, like someone who'd worked hard to appear harmless. She hesitated. After Leonard died, that man came back. I didn't recognize him at first. He said he was checking on the ring, but really, he wanted to know if Leonard had told anyone. He offered me money to stay quiet. Elena leaned forward. Do you remember what he looked like? Madeline was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to a side drawer, and pulled out a photograph. It was slightly blurry, taken at a distance, as if she'd snapped it without being seen. A man in a gray coat, stepping into a black sedan. Elena recognized him instantly, the slope of his shoulders, the profile of his face. The hair slightly too neat. It was Marco. She felt something inside her crack. Not a scream this time, not shock, just confirmation. She had loved a man who had hired someone to build her a weapon, and smiled at her while she wore it. Madeline sat back down, her voice soft. I think he was afraid Leonard had left something behind. Notes, sketches. But there was nothing. My husband burned them before he died. Said it was the only way to protect me. Elena reached across the table and gently took the older woman's hand. You've already helped more than you know. The hardest part wasn't what Elena had discovered. It wasn't the insurance documents, the secret recordings, or even the confirmation from Madeline. The hardest part was pretending she didn't know. Every morning, she woke up next to a man she now believed was planning her death. She had to kiss him, answer his questions, laugh at his tired jokes. Every evening, she sat across from him at dinner, listening to him talk about clients and deadlines, while her stomach twisted with every polite lie she told. She had learned to nod at the right times, to smile without showing too much of her teeth, to let him think she was still in love. But behind the curtain, she was moving. Quietly, deliberately. She copied the files from his laptop onto an encrypted flash drive. She saved the emails, the audio recordings, the scanned policy. She took photographs of the ring, both whole and opened. She contacted Jasmine every day, always through secure channels, sharing new details, making sure someone else knew everything in case something happened. She also stopped wearing the ring entirely. At first, Marco noticed. He asked where it was, and she lied, said her finger was irritated, that she was getting it resized. He frowned, then nodded. Said nothing more. But from that moment, he began watching her more closely. He started coming home early, cooking dinner, offering spontaneous weekend trips, and always, checking her reactions. His voice was gentle, but his eyes stayed sharp. Elena knew what it was. It was control. He was trying to gauge whether she suspected anything, whether the plan had been set in motion too soon. So she let him believe what he needed to. She said yes to the dinner dates, smiled when he touched her shoulder, even laughed when he made bad jokes. But her mind was elsewhere. counting steps, planning next moves, tracking which evidence still needed to be gathered. At night, she started locking the studio drawer where she kept the pouch. Not because she feared Marco would find it, he rarely entered her workspace, but because it was the only place in the house that still felt like hers. Her sanctuary, her war room. She began writing things down. Not in full sentences, just words, symbols, fragments only she could decode. Places, dates, file paths. She hid the paper inside the lining of her sketchpad, taped between pages she knew Marco would never open. Every time she flushed the toilet, she checked the water first. Every time she drank tea, she poured a little into the sink before sipping. She didn't trust anything he touched when she wasn't looking. She wasn't sleeping well. But oddly, she felt more awake than she had in months. Marco had created a narrative where she was supposed to weaken, physically, emotionally, mentally, until she collapsed into silence. But she wasn't collapsing. She was sharpening. She began researching toxicology labs, not public ones, private experts. Jasmine helped her identify a reputable specialist, someone used to discretion, the kind of person who didn't ask too many questions about how someone ended up with poison inside a ring. The appointment was made. Samples were arranged, and Elena, for the first time, allowed herself to breathe. One more step. Just one. Then she would stop pretending. Then she would fight back. The toxicologist took 3 days. 3 days of waiting, of holding her breath, of pretending everything was fine while Marco made coffee, folded laundry, and kissed her forehead like a man with no sins. Elena answered no calls during those 3 days, unless it was from Jasmine. She checked her messages constantly, even in the bathroom, the closet, in between words at dinner. On the 4th morning, the call came. Jasmine's voice was low and direct. "It's thallium," she said, slow-acting, colorless, nearly impossible to detect without targeted testing. Prolonged exposure leads to fatigue, nerve damage, organ failure. You were being poisoned, Elena. The confirmation hit her with more calm than fear. Not because it didn't matter, because it was finally real. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't fragile or paranoid or dramatic. She was right. Within an hour, she and Jasmine compiled everything. The ring in its sealed pouch, the toxicology report, signed and dated, the audio recordings from Marco's computer, the forged insurance papers, the photographs, the testimony from Madeleine Rosier, now written and notarized. Jasmine called her contact at the local precinct and scheduled a private meeting. No walk-ins, no statements yet, just facts. Elena packed everything into a folder and left the house that afternoon under the pretense of running errands. Marco didn't question her. He was in the backyard, trimming the hedges, humming something tuneless. He waved at her with a gloved hand, smiled like nothing was coming. Captain Naomi Carter met them in a private room at the station. She was quiet, professional, and most importantly, she believed Elena. Not because the story was dramatic, but because the evidence didn't lie. As she flipped through each page, each photo, each transcript, her expression shifted from neutral to grave. "This isn't just an attempted murder," she said at last. "It's premeditated, methodical, and if we don't act carefully, he'll know we're onto him." They coordinated the next steps: surveillance, timing, legal preparation for an arrest that couldn't afford to fall apart. Elena gave her full statement. Jasmine stayed by her side the entire time. But that night, back home, Marco was different. He didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't make dinner. He just watched her. Not openly, not in a way most people would notice. But she could feel it, the shift in the air, the sense that he had stopped performing and started calculating. She smiled, played her part. But deep down, she knew. He felt it. Something was unraveling. She didn't sleep. Not because of fear, because she knew that tomorrow or the day after, the next act would begin. And she was ready for it. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. Marco was in the kitchen, slicing fruit for breakfast when the doorbell rang. He opened it casually, barefoot, holding a plate of oranges. The officers entered quietly but firmly. One of them read him his rights, while another took the plate from his hand. Elena stood at the top of the stairs, watching without speaking. Marco didn't fight. He didn't ask why. He just looked up at her, and for the first time in years, his expression cracked. Not fear, not regret, confusion, like he truly believed he had done nothing wrong. At the station, he denied everything. He said the ring was a gift, the insurance policy a precaution, the audio recordings fabricated. He called Elena unstable, dramatic. He cried when they presented the toxicology report, laughed when they played the tapes. He refused to acknowledge the photo from Madeline. But the evidence was too solid, too consistent, too deliberate to ignore. The district attorney moved forward with charges: attempted murder, insurance fraud, possession of a controlled substance with intent to harm, obstruction of investigation. The case made the news briefly. Just another polished man with a dark secret. But Elena didn't watch. She stayed home, off-grid, away from reporters and curious colleagues. Jasmine handled everything legal. Elena handled herself. She didn't go to the trial. She didn't want to see him, hear him, or give him the satisfaction of her reaction. The verdict came 2 weeks later. Guilty on all counts. Marco Sinclair was sentenced to 30 years without parole. No appeal. No leniency. When Jasmine called with the final update, Elena simply said, "Good," and hung up. Then she stood in her living room, sunlight warming her shoulders, and took a deep breath that reached all the way down to the part of her that had once been afraid. The days after felt strange. Not like freedom, but like stepping into a silence she didn't know how to fill. She went through the motions, made coffee, took long walks, cleaned her studio. The nightmares came and went. The dizziness stopped. The ring stayed sealed in an evidence bag at the precinct, locked away with the rest of the past. Weeks later, she went to a small watchmaker's shop. Not to fix anything, but to buy something new. The man behind the counter showed her trays of modern designs, all sleek and practical. But she chose a plain silver ring. No gems, no stories. Just a band. Clean, undecorated. She slipped it onto her finger and smiled. Not because it sparkled, but because it didn't mean anything. And that, finally, meant everything.